And I say we can't prove they're certain, and we don't need to. So I think, that's pretty realistic, because we're in that situation of not being like omniscient, so that's realistic to accept that we don't know all the details, and that we still have a way to apply the knowledge that we do think we have. And sometimes we apply knowledge we find out later was either totally wrong, or more likely, partly wrong, or just ignored certain details. And it all works out. I mean, we know that F equals ma is not in the fundamental universe. General relativity adds terms to that. And some other theory might add more terms, but it's not going to subtract it back so that F equals ma. We've tested F does not exactly equal ma because of general relativity. Okay, but we know well why F equals ma works, because it's a good approximation to a very, very accurate degree. And so it works. We're not confused why it worked for us, even though there was an error in it. And that's true right now. Why pretend we don't have errors now? Let's just, it's maybe this is on your issue of time, granting relevancy to the future. I know that in the future we'll find some of the errors we have now. So why not admit I have errors now? I just don't know what they are. Because then who knows what to do? Well, the scientists do that, because surprisingly, when you take that approach, you can start to size up your errors. If I take F equals ma, before I've learned general relativity, through my measurements, through empirical testing, I can know that F equals ma 1 in a million parts or something. Or, you know what I'm saying? I can judge how much error there is based on how far my measurements deviate from my predictions. You brought up skepticism about the external world. Okay. Here's another thing. See, this is why I do not have a radical skepticism. I don't have a skepticism about the external world. I don't think that's an issue. My point is that by starting at the stream of perceptions, it doesn't matter about the external world. The external, the gravitational constant is the gravitational constant, whether it's being generated by a dream, by a software library because we're in the matrix, by some machine that's feeding us information in while our brain is in a vat, or if the world is made of little physical atoms that are immutable, which we know is not the case, or if it's this relativistic, materialistic mess of energy transfer in the quantum mechanical sense, which seems to be the case now. If it doesn't matter which of those, because all of those lead to these stream of perceptions. So the thing I know where they all converge is the stream of perceptions. And the external world is, if my view of this piece of pool chalk is generated by a software library, that's fine. The software library is still external. I use my perception to define which is external. So I'm not denying the external world per se. I'm just saying we don't have to characterize the external world as one thing other than another. See, I'm saying that the external world exists. I'm saying no, we're not going to know which of these functional equivalents it ever is. And so maybe we should figure out a way to explain why we're acting in the meantime. We're never going to explain which of the models. Why do we act like the gravitational constant is a certain value and that our foot is going to be crushed by a certain object if we drop it? Why do we act like that? Does it really have to be this external physical world to act that way? What if it was a dream and you were going to drop a stone on your foot and you knew that was going to hurt as much as things hurt in the real world? Don't you have a reason not to do that? See, you know what the perceptive results of these things are, and the fact that you can measure them so accurately is very interesting. And especially interesting, forget the computer metaphor, but especially interesting for dreams, because that's the thing. If we say life is a dream or any of these other metaphors, there actually are ways to discriminate between, what we're calling a dream and what the world seems to be like. We're saying, well, what if it really is just a dream? Well, if it's a dream, the way it's distinguished from any dreams any of us know is that it's very, 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 very consistent. Pretty hard to measure the force of gravity in a dream at night. Okay, I don't know anybody that's tried it, and if they succeeded, I'd be surprised if it wasn't related to their experiences doing the same thing in the real world, because the gravity in your dream, I think, could change. At least I've flown and stuff, so I don't think the laws of gravity were consistent enough to test the way I do in the real world. So that's a distinction. And if we were in a matrix, same kind of thing. Eventually we would find out a certain kind of discreteness that might be detectable, and not that eventually we would do it for certain, but I think there would actually be ways to discriminate that and eventually discover that if it were the case. But for the period of time that it's functionally indistinguishable, or in the sense that analytically we can always create some functionally equivalent indistinguishable option, then we don't know which is the answer. So we need to base our answers on something closer to us that we do know. And I find that comes down to the stream of perceptions. All these models have to explain the streams of perceptions because we all experience it. So that's the common, and so that's the universal. But it's not really universal, right? Because if it was universal, it was saying all things experience streams of perceptions. But no, I only think minds do. So we can abstract that and say, well, okay, but in principle, there's a similar thing, which is interactions. We see that our perceptions come, it looks like, through the sense perceptions anyway, through these interactions. So let's just abstract it to interactions and say that things, have to have these interactions, and everything has these interactions. But some things might be in isolation and not be having interactions. There's really no reason to make any absolute statements about all of this, especially since it all comes down to two different things. Our understanding of materialism is something we've done after we've accepted the evidence of our perceptions. So our epistemology, what we know, goes down to our human condition. Why? Because our knowledge is human knowledge, and we're explaining not the fundamentals of reality in epistemology, we're explaining the fundamentals of our knowledge. And those fundamentals will break down materially into various things, optional enough that we can imagine that, okay, those fundamentals, cognitive fundamentals, are going to be different in in an ant or some other mammal. There might be some similarities, but you wouldn't be surprised by some differences either. Okay, now, I would not talk about a mind independent from the world. I think you could talk about it as codependent, and I think you can get this through this, maybe this is a difficult threshold of my philosophy, but in my generalization of perceptions, which are interactions we detect, to interactions in general, which we don't detect, potential interactions. Okay, so a photon hits my skin, it heats up my skin just a little bit. I didn't really perceive it. But then again, my body's raised a tiny imperceptible amount. If enough of them hit me, like I'm in sunlight, I'll perceive that. So there's sort of a gradiated abstraction available there. And I think that's something worth analyzing, criticizing, and whatnot in my system. Because that is somehow how I get out into the so-called external world, which involves requirements such as existence independent of me. Because I have this dependency relationship on the interaction, but I don't actually think I have to perceive the interaction, but can actually argue that, well, epistemologically we have these parallel things of what's really going on, what's knowable, and versus what we really know. So, I just got interrupted by that. I'm going to have to go in a second. Probably a very long video. Okay, it's already 17 minutes. You said that empiricism is by no means the end-all be-all. That's fine. I accept your view on that. I just want to state that I think it is the end-all be-all. And I don't see how you can call that radical skepticism. All knowledge has to be justified empirically, the way scientific knowledge is. Not to the same rigorous levels. You can take a measurement in your personal life that's, well, how much do I love this person? That's all vague, and that's not going to be up to scientific standards, but it is empirical because you're basing it on your own perceptions. And if your perceptions aren't very consistent, you're going to have trouble with it. Like if every day it's like, I hate him, no, I love him, fine, and you're going to have some problems. But that's still empiricism trying to go from consistency. Maybe you'll realize, well, I can't ask this high-level question about love. I have to ask, well, how nice are they to me? Or something that I can measure a little bit better. And how is that radical skepticism? It's not very radical at all. I mean, that's what we all believe. You have to have evidence. You have to have a perception, a feeling, or a vision of the length of a ruler next to some other thing. That doesn't seem like radical skepticism to me. That doesn't seem like you can tell me, just because I'm subjectivist and base this all on a very realistic starting point of what we actually have to go from, and the fact that we're animals, not gods.